So yeah, we're gonna check out the TBM torpedo bomber. Grumman TBM. This is the largest single-engine airplane that was made for the United States in the Second World War. Okay, it was used primarily as a torpedo bomber. So in this torpedo bay, we have this 2,000-pound torpedo or 4 500-pound bombs. Okay. When you take a look at the airplane and when you compare, say, the landing gear to another aircraft here, like the A-26, you'll notice that this plane is very heavily built. It was designed by Grumman, a lot of them were made by Grumman, but this particular airplane was made by General Motors. Okay, all of the production shifted to war production during the Second World War. So we have the 2,000 horsepower engine, same one in the B-25. This is a big, heavy airplane. Not ultra maneuverable, but you know, the pilots say it kind of drove like a truck. But for its job, that's great because you're basically going in very low level, straight and slow, a lot of anti-aircraft, and you know, so it's a dangerous mission. But you're dropping that torpedo and getting going. So there's the pilot. Behind him you have the tail gunner, and then there's a radio man. We'll check out their seats. But as you can see, what I was talking about earlier, the wings fold because it's a carrier deck, right? So they got to get this thing up and down in elevators to rearm it, refuel it, do maintenance, and of course, if they're stacked on a carrier deck, you can fit a lot more of that. So Grumman did the Hellcat, the Wildcat that just took off, and so on. So traditionally, even into the Tomcat, Grumman was the airplane company for the Navy. All right, they were out of Long Island, and as you can see here, when you take a look at these pins for the attachments and so on, extremely heavy duty because when you're thinking about landing on a carrier, this carrier could be pitching up and down, 30 feet. So you have a flight control officer who's giving the pilot hand signals and so on, or waving them off if it's a bad approach. But when they do land, we'll take you back here. We have 3 big cables on the deck. And the reason for that is you have to stop this thing before it slams into rows of airplanes. So this arrestor hook is striped so that the officer on the deck can make sure that the hook is down. And then it would grab one of these cables and stop the airplane. And when you take a look at the Phantom back there, okay, if you check out its hook, it is very massive because it's much heavier airplane and a much higher landing speed. So you'll see here is the radio man's station, and so the gunner would come in through this door up into his position as a gunner. And so these quarters were kind of cramped. You may remember the President, George H. Bush, the father. He enlisted when he was 17 and flew these. During one mission, they were bombing radio installations on a Japanese island. They were shot down. And he banked the aircraft, got out as far away from the island as possible, and he was able to bail out. Unfortunately, at that low altitude, the radio man and gunner did not make it. And the poor guy, he felt, guilt and so on into his 80s. So again, very, very dangerous missions. These people were really young, 18, 19, 20. So when you think about what they had to do, again, very difficult mission. But a very effective airplane. So what I'd like to do now is just to show you a little bit about how this airplane is a lot different from the MiG and the Huey in terms of controls and systems. So just like First World War airplanes, there is, in terms of the control, there's no hydraulic assist or electric motors on this. So everything is cables and pulleys. So when you get in the cockpit and you pull the stick back and forth, this elevator will go up and down, okay? So you'll notice that, again, it's fabric coated, so it's lighter, so it's easier to do that. Now, When you get in the cockpit and you move the stick back and forth, it's kind of easy. But when, obviously, when the speed is higher and there's more wind blowing on this, it's harder to, you know, to work the controls. So I just wanted to point that out because you're going to see that in the cockpit. All right.
Huh.
The other thing you're going to see in the cockpit, only because the plane is enormous, is that you have lots of room. Okay, it's like my '67 Cadillac, all right, the convertible, all kinds of room in there. And when you get into the MiG-15, and the Huey actually is pretty roomy, but you'll notice that. Now there are two pilots here, okay? All three airplanes, okay, have basically the same instruments. The MiG-15 has Chinese writing. The MiG-21 has Russian Cyrillic writing. So from a pilot's perspective, you know, their most important instrument, airspeed indication, compass, all of that is similar in all three aircraft. We just have upgraded, you know, avionics, tons of switches for radios, armament systems, and so on. So you'll see that, you know, from a cockpit standpoint, the same instruments, but as they get more complex, more and more gauges, switches, and a lot of redundancy. So, for example, you have two radio transmitters and two receivers, right? One gets shot up, we still have another background. And that, of course, is true for civil aviation, too. All right? So let's make friends with the plane.
Right on top of each other. There's two of them, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Again, I don't know.
Play with the stick. Let me get in and play with the stick.
Have fun.
You can step on the seat?
Yeah.
All right. Dude, this is crazy. Holy moly.
Really comfortable seat, right?
I mean, it's not horrible.
The other ones are even worse. Okay, so you have your rudder pedals down there. You know, similar to everything you've flown, right?
Yeah.
You have your throttle mixture, flaps, gear, and then your trim here.
This is the trim here?
Yeah, the trim.
Oh, this one's got to be rudder trim then.
Right.
That's elevator trim and rudder trim, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So good old General Motors. A little bit in common with the 67 DeVille. Nothing worked, but it had a 429 and chrome as a convertible. I still do.
Wow. All right.
All right.